Tony was already awake in his bed when he heard Kevin talking to Charlie over his desk speakers. Tony whistled, Charlie barked, and Kevin laughed. Rita and Ava rose from their beds at the sound, and the three of them locked their suite doors and made their way down to Kevin's. They all removed their locks and discovered that the door would not open. Rita called to Kevin through the door, and Kevin said he did not know where his key was. Charlie barked. Everyone looked at each other in shock, and Ava told Kevin to check in his bed. They waited in silence until they heard Kevin handling his lock and the door opened. Everyone cheered. Charlie greeted everyone and left to use the washroom. Everyone waited in the kitchen for their turn to use the toilet. Once everyone was done, they filled their water bottles, stretched in the backyard, and then headed out for a jog around the park. They passed by other people in the park, and Rita and Ava greeted them, "Good morning," and everyone waved. When they returned to the backyard, they stretched again and began a lesson on whistling. Kevin and Ava were not able to whistle, but Rita was, so she gave an explanation. Kevin and Ava followed Rita's directions and were still not able to whistle. Ava frowned at Kevin and gave him a thumbs down. Rita assured them that if they practiced enough times, they would be able to whistle better than Tony. Tony nodded and gave them a thumbs up. Kevin sat and followed Rita's directions. After a while, he exhaled and spit saliva on his chin and started to laugh. Everyone laughed too, and Charlie licked Kevin's face. Ava suggested that they take a break from practicing, and everyone returned to Kevin's suite. Rita invited Kevin to pick some tomatoes from the garden on their way inside. Everyone sat at the table, and Rita gave Kevin a cookbook to look through. They came upon a bread recipe, which Ava pointed to and gave a thumbs up. After looking through more pages, Kevin pointed to a picture of cookies and gave 2 thumbs up. Everyone laughed and agreed to make the recipe. Rita guided Kevin to each ingredient and utensil that they read from the cookbook. Charlie stood beside Kevin and watched. Ava repeated the words and wrote them on the chalkboard. Tony poured everyone water and wrote in his notebook. When they finished making the dough, they placed it in the oven and cleaned up. Kevin pulled the finished bread from the oven on his own with the same concentration as his first pie. Everyone cheered. Tony smelt the bread and made loud sounds of enjoyment. They left the bread on the table to cool, and Charlie stood up with his front legs on the table to get a better smell of the bread. Everyone laughed, and Kevin rubbed his back until he stepped off the table. As they started preparing the cookies, Rita read the directions, Ava wrote on the chalkboard, Kevin completed each task, and Tony wrote in his notebook. Once the cookies were finished baking, Kevin took them out of the oven, bumped into Charlie on his way to the table, and dropped the cookies on the floor. Kevin pointed at Charlie and cried as he explained what happened. Everyone frowned and gave him thumbs down. Rita assured Kevin that it was an accident and rubbed Charlie's back. Ava explained it appeared Charlie did not bump Kevin on purpose, but that there was no way to truly verify if this was the case. Tony smelt the cookies as he picked them off the floor, made sounds of enjoyment, and gave Kevin a thumbs up. Kevin finished crying, rubbed Charlie's back, and Charlie licked his face. Rita smiled at Kevin and motioned for him to return to the table and make another batch. Ava smiled at Kevin and nodded her head. Kevin smiled and started to measure the ingredients again. He called out each ingredient as he added them to the bowl, and everyone cheered. Everyone cleaned up the kitchen as the cookies baked. Rita sliced the loaf of bread and started to serve tomato sandwiches. Everyone made sounds of enjoyment and gave thumbs up, except Charlie, who quickly ate his piece of bread. When the cookies were done, Kevin asked Tony to ensure Charlie was clear from the area between the oven and the table. When he placed the cookies safely on the table, everyone cheered. Ava sliced more pieces of bread and began to toast them. Kevin got up and observed how she was preparing the bread slices. She served everyone another sandwich. Everyone made sounds of enjoyment and gave Ava a thumbs up. Kevin gave Ava 2 thumbs up. Everyone laughed and Charlie barked. When the kitchen was clean again, everyone made their way over to the great room. Ava sat at the piano and began to play. Rita sat in a chair and began knitting and tapping her feet in time with the music. Tony laid on his back on the floor and started doing sit-ups in time with the music. Charlie circled around his bed a few times, scratching it with his paws, and then laid down. Kevin walked around the room and studied what everyone was doing. He made his way over to Charlie and sat in the chair next to him. Kevin watched everyone, rubbed Charlie's back, and started practicing whistling again. Tony took a break after doing sit-ups and smiled at Kevin. Ava finished her song, realized that Kevin was practicing whistling, and started to practice with him again. Rita whistled as she knit, and Charlie turned his head and watched her. After a while, Tony whistled, and Charlie jumped up and walked over to him. Tony stood up, whistled again, and Charlie stood on his back legs, putting his front paws in Tony's hands. Ava started playing the piano again, and Tony and Charlie danced together around the great room. Kevin laughed and joined in. Ava finished the song, and everyone clapped. Tony sat on the floor with Charlie and rubbed his back. Kevin sat down and rubbed Charlie's back too, and asked Tony to whistle again. Tony showed his tongue and mouth position, breathed in and out, and whistled with every inhale and exhale. Kevin did the same and whistled. Charlie jumped up and licked Kevin's face. Kevin laughed and everyone cheered. Ava frowned as she still could not whistle and asked Kevin to show her how he was whistling. Kevin got up close to Ava, showed his tongue and mouth, breathed in and out, and whistled again. Ava repeated his directions and spit on her chin. She laughed and frowned and gave a thumbs down, while Charlie licked her face. Kevin assured her that she just needed to keep practicing and eventually she would be able to whistle. Ava smiled and nodded and turned back to play the piano. Rita got up and everyone started to dance. Tony danced with Charlie again, and Rita started dancing with Kevin the same way. Then Rita grabbed one of Charlie's paws, and Tony grabbed one of Kevin's hands, and they all danced in a circle together. Everyone laughed, and Charlie barked. The song ended, and everyone cheered. Ava turned from the piano and started to whistle. Kevin jumped up and down, and everyone cheered and whistled together. Charlie howled, and everyone laughed and rubbed his back. Everyone sat down in a chair and relaxed. Tony poured everyone water and wrote in his notebook. Rita started to knit again, and Ava joined her. Kevin asked what they were doing, and they explained that they were making clothing. They gave Kevin his own knitting materials and utensils, and he followed along with their movements. Tony joined in, and Charlie watched from his bed. When Rita finished knitting a long piece, she called Charlie over and signaled for his paw. Charlie placed his paw on her knee, and she slid the knitted piece over his paw. It fit perfectly. Kevin laughed, and everyone cheered. Ava started playing the piano again, and Tony went back to the floor and started doing push-ups in time with the music. Kevin went over and joined Tony on the floor. He did a few push-ups, then laughed and laid exhausted on the floor. Tony did the same. Tony flexed his arm muscles and gave Kevin a thumbs up. Kevin did the same, and everyone laughed. Kevin made his way over to the piano and sat down next to Ava. Ava finished her song and opened a new book in front of them. She pointed at a note on the page, read it aloud, then pressed a key on the piano and said the note again. Kevin pressed the key and laughed. She pointed at the next note, and they continued. She pointed back at the first note of the sequence and let Kevin press the keys in order. When he was done playing, he laughed, everyone cheered, and Charlie barked. Tony got up and filled everyone's water bottle, and they followed him to the backyard. Everyone stretched and then started their afternoon jog around the park. There was a group of children kicking and chasing a ball around, and Kevin asked what they were doing. Tony whistled, and Charlie led them towards the group. As the children rubbed Charlie's back, Rita asked them if Kevin could join them, and they agreed. Tony grabbed Charlie's leash, and Kevin joined the children, kicking and chasing the ball around the park. Rita and Ava walked along and followed the group of running children, cheering when Kevin was able to control the ball. Tony started jogging with Charlie around the children and watched them play. Everyone kept cheering whenever Kevin controlled the ball. Kevin felt tired after playing with the children and joined everyone to rest and drink water. Kevin explained how he tried to run and kick the ball, and everyone nodded. Rita and Ava explained that Kevin played well, and Tony gave Kevin 2 thumbs up. Kevin pointed to the children running over to the playground on the other side of the park, and everyone decided to jog over. Kevin watched, and then decided he wanted to run around the playground with the other children. Tony and Charlie followed Kevin around from the perimeter of the playground. Rita and Ava sat and watched from the grass beside the playground. The group of children were singling out one child and calling them it. They then proceeded to run and distance themselves from the child who was it. And the child who was it chased everyone else until they touched someone and called them it. Kevin laughed as he avoided being touched by the children who were it. Through all the chaos of children running, Kevin collided with a larger child, fell down, and scratched the skin on his knee. He cried out in pain and immediately ran back over to everyone. Kevin pointed at the child who collided with him and cried and explained what happened. Charlie licked Kevin's face and then his knee, and Kevin started to laugh. Tony rubbed Charlie's back, and Kevin did the same. Tony gave Kevin 2 thumbs down, and everyone nodded and frowned. Rita assured Kevin that it was an accident and that his knee would feel better soon. Ava explained that it appeared the child did not collide with Kevin on purpose, but that he should remember the child in the future to avoid running into him again. Kevin nodded, and Tony wrote in his notebook. Ava inspected the scratch on Kevin's knee, poured her water on it, and Charlie licked it again. She pulled out a bandage and explained how it would protect the injury and improve its ability to heal. She showed Kevin how to apply the bandage, and Charlie continued to lick Kevin's face. Kevin laughed, and everyone joined in and rubbed Charlie's back. Rita told Kevin that he was tough. Tony flexed his arm and gave Kevin a thumbs up. Kevin did the same, and everyone laughed. Kevin went back to the playground and continued running away from the children who were it. Suddenly, Kevin was it, and everyone cheered him on as he chased the other children around. Tony watched anxiously, hoping that Kevin would not be it for very long. Eventually, Kevin touched someone, called them it, and ran away laughing. Everyone cheered, Tony whistled loudly, and Charlie howled. Kevin laughed and waved to everyone as he continued to run around the playground. After a while, Kevin became too tired to continue playing, and everyone returned to the backyard to stretch and relax. As everyone sat with their eyes closed, Kevin and Charlie got up, grabbed wood from the pile, and placed it in the fire pit. Kevin started a fire, and everyone cheered. Kevin and Charlie walked over to the workshop and retrieved the stereo. Everyone cheered, and Ava turned on the music. Kevin and Charlie went to the garden and pulled some carrots. Kevin cleaned them and handed them out to everyone. Charlie licked Kevin's face, and Kevin laughed and rubbed Charlie's back. Everyone relaxed, and Tony wrote in his notebook. Kevin explained again what happened when he collided with the other child, how his knee felt from the fall, and how it started to feel better afterwards. Everyone listened and nodded as Kevin relayed his experience. He explained with detail what had happened when he was touched and when he touched the other child, and how he was able to run away without being touched again. He laughed as he talked of the playground and the children and his injury. Ava told Kevin that he was very good at playing tag, and Rita said he was tough. Kevin flexed his arms, everyone laughed, and Tony wrote in his notebook. They extinguished the fire, and everyone followed Rita to the garden to dig potatoes and pick lettuce. Kevin laughed in amazement when the pitchfork exposed the potatoes hidden in the soil. They brought the ingredients inside, and Rita and Kevin started to prepare them. Rita also prepared dough and explained to Kevin how the recipe was similar to what he had done earlier that day. Ava wrote on the chalkboard, and they all continued to discuss everything they were doing to prepare each recipe. Everyone described which flavors in the recipes were their favorite, and Tony wrote in his notebook. Kevin noticed Charlie jump down from his chair and pounce on the floor. He got up to follow Charlie and saw a spider. Kevin immediately jumped back onto his chair and alerted everyone to the spider. Everyone laughed and assured Kevin there was nothing to be afraid of. Ava lowered her hand to the floor and let the spider crawl onto her hand and arm. Kevin continued to look terrified and distanced himself from the spider. Rita reminded Kevin that Charlie was not scared of the spider and only wanted to play with it because there was nothing to be afraid of. Tony let the spider crawl on his arm, and Rita did the same. As she brought the spider closer to Kevin, Charlie stood next to Kevin, and Kevin rubbed his back. Kevin slowly reached out his hand, let the spider crawl on, and shook the spider off onto the table. Everyone laughed. Charlie tried to touch the spider with his paw, and Kevin lowered his hand to pick up the spider again. As the spider crawled back on his hand, he laughed and studied the spider with wide eyes. Everyone laughed, and Charlie barked. They placed the spider in a container on the table so it could not escape, and Kevin continued to study it. After they finished cleaning the kitchen, everyone made their way over to the great room. Ava started playing a record of music on the sound system. Tony pulled out a large padded box from the closet and proceeded to unfold it. Charlie started whining and spinning around on the floor. Kevin laughed and watched Tony complete the setup of the table. Charlie jumped on the table and laid on his back with his legs up in the air and his tongue sticking out the side of his mouth. Everyone grabbed one of his paws and began massaging. They showed Kevin their techniques and he followed along. Charlie made sounds of enjoyment and everyone laughed. They moved on to his legs, showing and explaining their technique to Kevin. When they were done massaging Charlie, Ava climbed onto the table and laid on her stomach. Rita and Tony each grabbed one of her feet and started to show and explain to Kevin their technique. Ava giggled once in a while and explained to Kevin that she was ticklish. They moved on to her lower legs and then upper legs. Kevin took over massaging from Rita and tried her technique. Ava told Kevin he was doing a good job. When they were done massaging her legs, Kevin volunteered to be massaged next. He giggled when Ava and Rita started on his feet and enjoyed the rest of the massage. They commented on his calf muscles being tight and recommended that he concentrate on stretching them in the future. Kevin agreed, and Tony wrote in his notebook. After everyone had their turn on the table, Tony showed Kevin how to fold it back up. Ava started playing the piano, and Rita continued her knitting. Tony then started to set up a film projector and a screen. Charlie laid in his bed, and Kevin sat in the chair next to him. As the film started, everyone stopped what they were doing and focused on the images projected on the screen. There was a man, and he was walking along a sidewalk. The film had no sound, so Ava started playing along with the action. Everyone began laughing at the actions of the man and the situations he was walking into. Tony was laughing so hard that he started to cry. Kevin noticed this and began to laugh even harder. Charlie licked Tony's face, howled, and paced around the great room. Kevin rubbed his back, and everyone kept laughing as the film went on. Ava laughed as she continued playing the piano along with the action. Rita eventually started crying from laughter, and Charlie started to lick her face. After the last scene, the screen went blank, and everyone clapped and cheered and sat exhausted from laughter. After everyone waited their turn to use the toilet, they all made their way to the washroom and carried out their evening routine. Kevin started acting out his favorite scenes from the film. Tony did the same, and everyone laughed. When everyone was done washing up, they made their way out the suite door. They confirmed with Kevin from outside that they had fastened their locks, and he confirmed he had done the same inside. They made their way to their respective desks and waved and greeted each other. Tony started to type out the day's events from his notebook, and Rita and Ava read each line. Kevin added details that he remembered from the day, Tony typed them, and Rita and Ava read them aloud. Kevin asked if the cameras in the house were recording like a film. Rita explained that their cameras were not recording. Ava added that there was no way to truly verify if this was the case. Tony smiled and shrugged his shoulders, and Kevin laughed and did the same. Eventually, Kevin and Charlie made their way into their beds and fell asleep before the reading of the day's events was complete. Tony noticed that Kevin was asleep and typed it out. Rita and Ava noticed and typed out their agreement. The three continued to type out their thoughts and feelings about what happened that day and how they were proud of Kevin and amazed by the many things he had done. They shared ideas about what to do the next day and discussed ways to improve the various things they had already done. They could all see each other yawning in their monitors, but they felt they needed to stay awake and discuss everything that was on their minds. They all could not wait for the next day to begin.